My name is Alina, I'm 34, and if you believe the papers, I'm a woman who voluntarily signed herself into a trap. If you believe those same papers to the end, any mistake I make costs not only the marriage, but everything that surrounds me, down to the underwear in the closet. This used to be called a, quote, prenuptial agreement. Now it's proof of how easily youth confuses romance with naivete. I was 20 when Igor proposed signing it. He was older, hadn't yet turned 30, thin from lack of sleep and ambition, with the eyes of someone who is simultaneously terrified of failure and hungrily wants to grow. Back then, he had neither this house, nor the cars, nor the status. He only had plans and loans. "It's just business protection, Alina," he said. "You know I'm doing everything for us. I need to make sure no one can ever say you married me for money. And if someday someone betrays someone, everything will be fair." The lawyers wrote a document that people our age usually look at as a boring formality. I leafed through the pages, saw words like assets, obligations, inheritance, and caught myself thinking it all sounded like a foreign language. One clause was clear without a translator. In case of proven infidelity, the wife loses everything. Not part of the property, not shared savings, everything. The house, cars, accounts, even jewelry that's formally listed as gifts can be recognized as, quote, part of the overall financial structure in a dispute. Igor smiled and kissed my forehead while I read this clause. "You're not going to cheat on me, are you?" he asked. I smiled too. Of course not. Back then, it seemed like a vow of love. Now, a signed sentence. 14 years have passed. From the outside, everything looked exactly as Igor had dreamed. Me, well-groomed, petite, very slim, with a European face and distinct Asian features, a short pixie cut, and the perfect color of highlighted hair. A house outside the city with panoramic windows, cars that get changed more often than some people change shoes, vacations twice a year, wherever you want, just choose. He's a 40-year-old successful entrepreneur who likes to repeat the story of how he slept on a mattress on the floor and hauled boxes. His favorite phrase, "Everything you see around you, I built for you." This phrase sounds beautiful until you start hearing the second track in it, "And everything you see around you belongs to me." The contract lay in the safe and didn't surface in any conversation for years, until Danya appeared in my life. I met him where Igor expected to see only a safe background at the gym, which he himself paid for, so you'd have the best. A typical premium class gym, glass, white walls, sleek equipment, music that tries to sound like motivation. There are many such places in the lives of people like us. A visit, a receipt, a photograph story, and on to the next item on the to-do list. I didn't go there for abs. I went there to convince myself that at least something in my life still depended on my decisions. Danya was one of the trainers. 20 years old. Tall, athletic, with the type of beauty people usually burn through at parties, but he used it to show people the correct squat angle. I quickly realized that for him, this gym wasn't a hangout spot, but a chance. Poor childhood, dorms, medical school, side jobs to pay for housing and food. All of this was readable even without long stories, from the way he looked at things that had long become background for me. At first, there was nothing like that between us. Technique, recommendations, light jokes. He corrected my grip, called me by name, said I had excellent foundation, and for the first time in a long while, I heard praise not connected to how I look in photos through other people's eyes. The affair didn't begin with me seeing him shirtless. It began when one day, sitting in the car in the parking lot after a workout, I caught myself thinking, I don't want to go home, not now. Not to this perfect house where everything has long been decided for me. When the first real step across the client-trainer boundary happened between us, I wasn't struck by guilt. That came later. The first thing was relief. A year of my double life fit between meeting schedules, dinners, and don't worry, I'll take care of everything. During the day, I continued playing the role of the ideal wife of a successful man. In the evening, I turned into a woman who laughs at the stupid jokes of a 20-year-old guy on cheap hotel sheets and feels alive, not like an exhibit. I knew I was violating that very clause in the contract. For a long time, I pretended not to remember the wording. But one night, when Igor left on a business trip, I went down to the study, opened the safe, took out the folder, and reread it. In the event of the spouse's infidelity, confirmed by documentation or other evidence, all property rights transfer to the husband. The spouse forfeits rights to real estate, movable property, funds, and other assets, including gifts acquired during the marriage. Legal language doesn't know how to be ashamed, it just records reality. I closed the folder and understood a very simple thing. If Igor learns the truth and wants to punish me by law, I won't return to just a modest life, but to nothing. There won't be, I'll leave you half out of respect for the past. There will be a court, lawyers, and a cold reference to the clause bearing my signature. It was at this moment that the affair with Danya stopped being just an affair. Before this, I could still imagine that I'd confess, leave into nothing, rent a small apartment, and somehow survive on my own. After that night, my imagination refused to paint pictures without money, without a name, and without the usual standard of living. The fear of being left in an empty room with a suitcase of belongings turned out to be stronger than any fear of being caught. When I later told Danya about the contract, not in details, but in essence, if he catches us, I'll have nothing left, he was silent for a long time. And then he said one phrase, after which the whole story turned onto the road we're walking now. If he always shielded you with himself, let him do it to the end this time. Danya's phrase echoed in my head for a long time. Let him do it to the end this time. For many years, I lived in a world where Igor really did shield me from everything. From loans, from failures, from unpleasant conversations. He paid, negotiated, put out fires, while I occupied myself with what was called the beautiful life in photographs. The idea that this willingness of his to sacrifice could be used as part of a plan seemed too cruel at first, then too logical. If you remove the emotions, the scheme looked almost elegant. I find myself in a situation where I formally face prison. Igor, as always, rushes to save me, to protect the business from account seizure. He transfers property and assets to me as a trusted person. He takes the blame, gets a sentence. I remain with the money and freedom. Lawyers never write such scenarios, but between the lines of any contracts, there's always space for human ingenuity. Danya and I started talking about this first as a fantasy. Imagine if, that's how not only love stories begin, but criminal ones too. I knew one thing for sure, I didn't want Igor to die. I'm not a sadist or an heiress from a thriller who dreams of physically getting rid of people. I wanted him to disappear from my life as the one who controls everything. Prison seemed extreme, but a logical continuation of his own scenarios about self-sacrifice. He always says he'll endure anything as long as you're okay, Danya said once. Give him a chance to prove it. It's strange how easily cynicism can masquerade as a romantic gesture. The main problem wasn't what will happen to him, but how to make sure his accounts aren't frozen. If a successful businessman gets imprisoned for a serious case, in most stories his capital goes to prison with him. The company comes under investigation, assets get blocked, partners flee. For the plan to work, by the day of sentencing, Igor needed to officially own almost nothing. At this moment, the prenuptial agreement that had hung over my head as a threat for so many years suddenly became part of a possible way out. On paper, everything was written so that if I cheated, I'd lose everything. But in our world, documents rarely live on their own. They're managed by people. If you imagine that infidelity isn't legally recorded anywhere, and instead something else is recorded, his admission of guilt, his signatures on the transfer of assets to me during a difficult situation, the picture changed. I began to see a sequence of steps. An accident where I'm the formal culprit. Shock, tears, threats of criminal prosecution. Igor, who as always comes to solve everything for me. Conversations with lawyers about how, in case of a sentence, his accounts and company might be frozen. Temporary transfer of property and accounts to me to save the business. His admission of guilt. The sentence. Me with the money, him behind bars. All the dirt would be taken on by circumstances and formulations. We didn't discuss each step so straightforwardly. Sometimes they were hints, sometimes phrases said in jest that remained hanging in the air. But inside me, all of this was forming into a quite concrete scenario. I often think about that evening when I first said aloud what I'd previously only allowed myself to think. Danya and I were lying on a narrow bed in a cheap motel, the air conditioner humming, some series playing on mute on TV. I looked at the ceiling and said, if everything is done right, he'll transfer everything to me himself, thinking he's saving his empire. He'll tell the lawyers himself that he was behind the wheel. He'll go to court himself. I won't even have to ask for anything. Danya was silent for a long time. Are you sure he loves you that much? He asked quietly. I was. That was the scary part. I knew that if I presented Igor with a situation where the choice was between his freedom and mine, he'd choose mine. He always chose. The only difference was that before, I thanked him for it. Now, I was planning to use it. The longer we talked about it, the less it resembled a fantasy. I started behaving not like someone torn between can and can't, but like someone preparing. I drove the necessary routes, looked at where it was darker, where there were fewer cars, where one could stage, quote, a person suddenly appearing on the road. In reality, it looked mundane. A 34-year-old woman behind the wheel of an expensive car who, quote, likes to drive alone to think. Inside, though, I was counting seconds until turns and memorizing where there weren't any cameras. The contract lying in Igor's safe stopped being just a threat. It became a timer. As long as no one knows about the affair, he can't use it. As long as infidelity isn't proven, the document is just paper under glass. If everything goes according to my scenario, the first official document in this story won't be the prenuptial agreement, but the interrogation protocol of a husband who admits guilt in an accident to save his wife. Morally, it looked like I was turning our world upside down. Legally, like a strange but possible combination. I understood that for many, such logic sounds monstrous. But when you live for many years with the thought that any honesty will leave you in an empty room without a name or money, honesty becomes a luxury. And calculation, a way to breathe. Every story has a point after which you're no longer just fantasizing, but living as if everything is decided. In my case, that point wasn't a kiss or a fight, but an open browser window with a map of a country road. I sat at that very huge kitchen table that Igor chose for big family dinners and studied roads as if planning a trip. On the screen, the familiar route to the dacha. In my head, no longer picnics and barbecues, but words like lighting, cameras, blind spot. From the outside, it looked absurd. A well-groomed 34-year-old woman in a silk shirt, perfect manicure, panoramic windows, and open tabs with driver forums discussing where patrols are most common and where they never check anyone. I'm just looking, I kept telling myself, That's what people always say when crossing the line. Danya was increasingly transforming from a lover into an accomplice during this time. Not legally, morally. He could have stepped back at any moment. Said, "This is too much." He had no prenuptial agreement, no house he could lose. But he had his own demons: poverty, debts, hatred of helplessness. He brought to our scenario what I didn't have: understanding of how systems work from the inside. He knew how hospitals write protocols, how they record time, how easily details get lost in gray zones if you pay enough or ask correctly. We sat in cheap hotel rooms over a phone map, discussing things that normal couples in love don't talk about. Where the shoulder is worst lit, where there are no cameras, what time the traffic flow is minimal. I didn't think about blood, bones, and injuries. This is important to understand. Scenes from horror movies weren't running through my head. There was only a construction, event, reaction, consequences. Event: an accident in which I'm formally at fault. Reaction: Igor, who's seeing a threat to my freedom, stands between me and the system. Consequences: his confession, his signature, his transfer of assets temporarily to my name, my departure. When you live next to someone for many years, you start to anticipate not only their words, but their future decisions. I knew how Igor reacts to threats. He doesn't know how to retreat. He knows how to go head-on and put everything he has on the table. If tomorrow they tell him, "Your wife could go to prison if you don't take the blame," he'll take it, even if later he'll hate himself more than me. I built the plan relying not on Igor's weaknesses, but on his strength. That's what makes this story so unpleasant. At night, I walked around the house and looked at everything surrounding us as a museum of my future life. The couch we spent a month choosing. The fireplace where he once proposed to me. The kitchen where we almost never cooked because everything was brought from restaurants. A simple thought kept running through my head. If he finds out about the affair, honestly, by accident, through someone else's glance or a recording, all this will disappear for me in one day. I wasn't trying to justify myself. I was trying to convince myself that the plan was the only way to not wake up one day in an empty room with a suitcase and a piece of paper where a lawyer dryly reminds me about the clause, "in case of infidelity." The closer I got to day X in my head, the stranger Igor behaved. He didn't make scenes, didn't break furniture, didn't throw phones. On the contrary, he became softer. He often looked at me as if trying to remember every detail. He asked if I was tired, if I wanted to change gyms, if he could pick me up himself in the evening. Once at dinner, he remarked almost casually, "Strange how much you've started driving alone. You used to find it boring behind the wheel. Now you really love that highway." I smiled, said something about "it clears my head." Everything inside tightened. If he suspects something, the contract is his weapon. If he doesn't suspect, it's mine. Sometimes his questions sounded as if he was already sitting across from a psychologist, trying to explain where everything went wrong. "Are you happy, Alina?" he asked once, not looking away. The question sounded calmer than the heartbeats in my chest. I answered, "Of course." The lie slipped out easily. That evening, lying down to sleep next to the man I was planning to transform from the master of this empire into its prisoner, I thought for the first time not only about myself. If someone from the outside saw us now, a 40-year-old successful man and his perfect wife, they would never guess that in someone's head, a rehearsal of an accident, interrogations, and asset transfers was already underway. The scariest thing in this whole story for me isn't the plan, and not its possible consequences. The scariest thing is how mundanely all of this fit into my ordinary life. I still chose a dress for dinner, argued with the designer about tile color, and liked friends' photos. And in parallel, I counted how many turns on the highway to the place where my before was supposed to end. At any point where I could have stopped, there was always a thought that pushed me further. Gone too far to turn back. The most dangerous phrase a person who's devised a plan can say to themselves. I caught it in my head when I once again drove along the country highway alone. This was the same road Igor and I had driven dozens of times to the dacha, argued about music, discussed his deals and my ideas about what to occupy myself with. Now, every turn on this road had a double meaning. During the day, a weekend route; at night, part of a possible scheme. The scenario that Danya and I had worked through in conversations looked compressed into several key points. Late evening, me alone behind the wheel, a section without cameras and with poor lighting, a sudden person by the roadside, sharp maneuver, brakes, impact, shock, ambulance, hospital. Igor, who gets called and told his wife faces criminal charges. Further, in our version, it wasn't cars and doctors that kicked in, but characters. I knew how he reacts to threats. He's one of those people who can't stand aside if it concerns his. All his life, he built himself as a man who shields against any blows. In a simple road story, it would look like a noble gesture. A husband takes the blame for his wife because he's sure it's easier for him to endure trial in prison. In my head, it looked like a mechanism that could be triggered. Not just to avoid prison myself, but also to bypass that very prenuptial agreement. If Igor confesses to a serious crime, he transforms from a, quote, successful entrepreneur into a person whose assets could potentially be under threat. Audits, account freezes, suspicions. The logical move in such a situation seems to be, quote, transfer everything to a trusted person to save the company. And the most suitable, trusted person in his worldview was me, the one for whom everything was built. Sometimes Danya and I voiced this part aloud. He'll sign the papers himself, I said, convince the lawyers himself that it's safer this way. He'll explain himself that I need to officially own everything while he solves his problems. And you'll already be thinking whether to solve them with him, Danya added. That phrase sounded harsh. But at that moment, harshness became something like armor for me. Stopping myself was more dangerous than continuing, because stopping would mean admitting everything, both the affair and the thoughts, and how far I'd gone in my fantasies. Sometimes a different fear covered me, not for myself, but that Igor would turn out not to be what I imagined him. What if he doesn't take the blame? What if he says, "This is your problem, you answer for it"? Then the contract would work against me at full power. And instead of the scenario, he's in prison, I have the assets, it would turn out I'm under investigation, he has the contract and an army of lawyers. I tried not to run this version through my head. But no matter what plan Danya and I drew up, reality still seeped through. Igor increasingly made small but alarming remarks. About the cameras at the entrance. We should update them, the old ones often glitch, and who knows who drives by there. About my car. We'll install a dash cam, it's safer. These days you never know who'll jump under your wheels. About the highway. There was an accident there recently. Saw it in the news. Terrible place. Each such phrase sounded like a simple everyday comment. In my head, like a warning. I didn't know if he was looking at me as a woman who drives alone a lot and could get hurt, or as a person who has reasons to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's an abyss between these two views. Sometimes it seemed to me that Igor sensed how Danya and I were carefully shuffling cards behind his back, but didn't understand exactly what. He just felt a shift in the air. He started bringing up the topic of trust more often. "You know I'll always cover for you, whatever happens," he said once, simply pouring me wine. Before, such phrases warmed me. Now, they reminded me that his readiness to cover could become both my freedom and his sentence. I don't know at what point I stopped seeing him as a person and started seeing a set of functions: providing, covering, signing. Maybe it was that night when Danya and I once again dissected the highway piece by piece, and I said he instead of husband the way people usually talk about a figure in a scheme. Now, when psychologists and investigators are analyzing this story after the fact, they love to ask one question: was there a moment when you could have called it all off? Yes, there was. Many. Every time I got behind the wheel and could have driven a different road. Every time Igor looked at me and asked if I was happy. Every time Danya fell silent in the middle of the phrase, "what if?" But in detective stories, there's rarely one clear turning point. More often, many small steps where each time you choose not crime, but a little bit further. And the further you go, the less it seems like you still have the right to simply turn around and leave.
My name is Igor, I'm 40, and if you ask any of our mutual acquaintances who I am, they'll say something like, "That husband of Alina's who carries her on his hands and built this whole world for her." There's some truth in that, and some self-deception. I'm not one of those men who were born in a ready-made house with servants. My starting capital was a mattress on the floor, a warehouse, night shifts, and endless spreadsheets on a laptop without a proper battery. When I met Alina, I already had plans, but no guarantees. She had beauty, lightness, and that mix of European features with Asian roots that honestly made me lose my head a bit. I very quickly decided I wanted her to live in a different reality, not the one I came from. All these years can be reduced to one formula: I work. She lives the way I imagine is right. House, cars, vacations, gyms, cosmetologists, designers. I learned to say, "This is for you," as easily as others say good morning. Many call me whipped. Perhaps they're right. I've always put her above myself. The contract we signed at the beginning was my compromise with the world. On one hand, love; on the other, a business I poured nights and years into. I wanted to believe Alina was with me, not for the money, but I also wanted to protect myself from a scenario where someday someone takes half of what I built because that's how it's done. The lawyers proposed a standard package. I added one clause harsher than necessary. In case of infidelity with proof, the wife is left with nothing. "It's just a formality," I told her then, watching her sign at the bottom of the pages. "I trust you, just not the world." I really didn't think this clause would ever become relevant. That was probably my mistake. From the outside, our life looked exactly as I wanted. Alina, groomed, effortless, always in something that costs a lot and looks even more expensive. Me, in suits, meetings, negotiations. In the evening, a shared home, shared kitchen, shared bed. But there are things only someone living alongside you can see. At some point, her gaze started going somewhere past me. Not sharply, not dramatically. The focus just shifted. She spent more time outside the house. Gym, girlfriends, some errands she didn't like to elaborate on. I'm not the type to go through phones or conduct harsh interrogations. I always believed trust is when you can not know everything and still sleep peacefully. But peaceful sleep gradually left. At first, I chalked everything up to age, to fatigue from routine, to her simply being bored with the role of successful man's wife. Then I started noticing details. She began leaving alone in the evenings more often, and on the same highway, to the dacha, as she said. Although before, we almost always went there together. She suddenly became interested in things she'd never asked about: where our cameras are, whether the recorder at the gate records anything. If an accident happens, they'll find us, right? I joked it off, said I'd make the system even better, that we'd install new cameras, that if anything, I'd always fix everything. I was used to fixing everything. That became my role. One night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her walking around the house barefoot, going down to the study. I lay there counting steps. Then, the sound of the safe. In the morning, I pretended not to notice anything, but I understood for myself. If someone retrieves documents in the middle of the night that hadn't been opened for years, it means something inside them diverged from the outside long ago. I knew exactly which papers she was looking at. The prenuptial agreement. I don't know what was scarier for her when she reread those lines. Losing everything because of infidelity, or seeing in black and white how I once recorded my distrust of the world on paper. Maybe both. Sometime later, strange words started appearing in conversations. Not directly, but tangentially. She might say at the table, "Can you imagine? One acquaintance's husband got into an accident. So much paperwork, protocols, case processing." Alina had never been interested in protocols before. She was interested in dresses and locations. I listened and felt a chill growing somewhere under my skin. Jealous men have two paths, yell or watch. I chose the second. Not because I'm noble, but because I'm used to gathering facts first and then making moves. That was the businessman in me talking, not the spouse. I started paying more attention to small things. To when she leaves, who she texts, which names she repeats slightly more often than others. That's when I first heard Danya. The trainer said, the trainer thinks, the trainer is sure. The name embedded itself in phrases as something mundane, too mundane. You could chalk it all up to my suspiciousness. To me, just being a 40-year-old man afraid that someone younger and freer will appear next to his 34-year-old wife. Maybe that's true. I didn't follow her around, didn't hire a detective, didn't conduct interrogations. But with each day, I understood more clearly. Somewhere alongside me, there's another life I'm not being let into. And in that other life, our contract stopped being just a piece of paper in the safe. I often think whether that contract was my insurance or a mine I planted under our marriage myself. On paper, it protected me. In life, it became a knife either of us could grab first. The stronger my suspicion grew, the more I clung to the role of loving husband. I started doing what I thought a man afraid of losing should do, gave more gifts, asked more often how she felt, offered to go together to places she used to go alone. "I can pick you up from the gym," I'd say. "No, I'll do it myself, it's more convenient," she'd answer, turning toward the window. Danya's name became something like a new background sound in the house. Not loud, but persistent. One day I stopped by that gym, not for a scene, not to check. Just to see with my own eyes what the world where she spends so much time looks like. An ordinary place, people in sportswear, music, trainers who smile at every new client. They showed me the list of personal trainers. I ran through the surnames, like through a report. Danya was just one line. I could have signed up for a training session with him, under the guise of a client. Could have asked a couple of random questions, looked into his eyes, and understood if there was what I feared to see. I didn't do it then. Instead, I returned home and stared at the closed safe for a long time. Inside lay a paper by which one signature of mine could strip Alina of everything. And the thought that she, perhaps, was already building her life as if that paper were nothing. I didn't know what exactly was happening between her and this 20-year-old trainer, didn't see them together, didn't catch them red-handed. All I had were small inconsistencies. She said she was at the gym the whole time, but from the cameras I saw the car was parked not there and not for as long as she described. She mentioned just coffee with a girlfriend, but in the card statement, places appeared where girlfriends don't usually go. It's not enough for courts, but enough for something to shift inside. I'm not God, not an investigator, and not a psychologist. Just a man who knows too well how people deceive themselves and others. The paradox is that the more I noticed, the less certain I was whether I wanted to know the truth completely. One part of me wanted exposure, a scandal, answers. The other wanted to continue living in the illusion where I'm still the husband who built this world for her and she's still in it. Sometimes I perhaps pushed her toward confession myself. "You seem different somehow," I said once. "You drive alone more, laugh less at home. Are you happy?" She smiled, said yes. If she had said no at that moment, everything could have gone differently. We could have divorced quietly, without schemes, without plans, without highways and hospitals. I might not even have invoked that contract clause. But she chose yes. I chose to believe, or to pretend to believe. Deep down, where not the businessman lives but the person, I understood. One of us two is deceiving the other. Sometimes it seems to me that in this story, I myself became the perfect victim. A man under his wife's thumb who loves too much to look truth in the face in time. A man who signed a contract thinking about his safety and ended up creating a scenario where any step of his wife's is either her catastrophe or mine. The psychologist later asked, "Didn't you think that your harsh clause about infidelity could push her not toward honesty but toward trying to circumvent the rules?" I thought about it, but only after. Back then, I just lived with anxiety I couldn't name. Watched Alina leave at night on a highway that's shown in the news when there's another accident. Listened to her casually ask about cameras and recorders. Tried to convince myself these were coincidences. I wasn't making plans. Wasn't sitting over maps at night. Wasn't thinking through steps. I just increasingly tightened my grip on the role I'd chosen for myself many years ago, to be the one who will always shield her, whatever happens. The only problem is that if you live in this role too long, someday someone might decide that your whatever happens is a perfect tool.
My name is Danya. I'm 20. And in this story, they usually say, I'm that young lover. It sounds beautiful if you don't know what poor childhood actually smells like and how much someone else's luxury costs when you spent your whole life looking at it through a shop window. I was born far from the houses where people like Alina and her husband live. In my yard, the main sound wasn't business-class cars, but bottles in the night and shouting through thin walls. My mother counted coins at the register. I counted days until the stipend. Sports was first a way not to go crazy, then a ticket somewhere. People like Alina come to the gym where I worked as a trainer like it's a set decoration. Glass, music, expensive sneakers, watches that cost as much as all the furniture in our old two-room apartment. They can skip a workout because of bad mood. I can't, because I get paid for each hour based on showing up, not mood. When Alina appeared for the first time, I noticed her immediately. Petite, very slim, with that combination of a European face and Asian features, short haircut, carefully styled blonde. She didn't just smell of perfume, but of what I never had, stability. At first, everything was by the book. Greeting, filled out form, basic test, load recommendations. I noted to myself that she had good genetics, muscles, held form, even if she didn't kill herself with workouts. Her look wasn't like most clients. Many come to the gym to hate their reflections. She, to at least somewhere, feels she could control the process. We started simple. I corrected technique, she laughed at my jokes. I was used to older women seeing me as beautiful background. She looked differently, not at a boy with definition, but at a person who suddenly became her personal territory without someone else's control. At first, I treated it like a familiar game. Rich client, more attention, tips, more generous, part of the profession. Then I noticed I was waiting for her more than for others. The affair didn't begin the moment we ended up in a motel. It began when I caught myself tracking the time of her arrival, moving my snacks and my schedule to fit her window. When it happened between us, I wasn't thinking about contracts, marriages, consequences. I was thinking that for the first time in my life, a person from that world was looking at me not down, but as if I meant something. She didn't tell me about her husband right away. First, there were hints. He works a lot. He has his own business. He did everything for me. Classic set. I figured out the rest myself. Rich 40-year-old husband, house, cars, golden cage. I first heard about the contract in that very motel where the air conditioner hummed louder than our thoughts. "If he finds out, I'll be left with nothing," Alina said, looking at the ceiling. "We have a contract. If I cheat, I fly out of this life naked." I didn't immediately understand what she meant. For me, a prenuptial agreement was from that world where people insure not only cars, but feelings. She explained briefly, without legal terms, but very clearly, if the husband catches her cheating and wants to invoke the document fully, she loses the house, money, everything. I was silent. I imagined our communal apartment where we shared a room among three. I imagined her walk-in closets, cars, all these trips, and for the first time felt that between us wasn't just age and status, but an abyss that can't be jumped over with one beautiful romance. "If he catches us, you'll be left with nothing, and I'll remain who I always was," I said. That thought burned. After some time, conversations started changing. Instead of, "What if he finds out?" phrases appeared like, "What if we make it so he can't use the contract?" She didn't say kill or imprison. She said, "Make it so he's the guilty one, not me." At first, I perceived it as nervous fantasies. People in stressful relationships often say too much. But one day, she said aloud what would later become the foundation. "He always shielded me. If they come to imprison me, he'll stand in front. And if before that he transfers everything to me so accounts don't get frozen, then he'll end up without freedom and without business." At that moment, two things collided in me. First, fear. I understood this was no longer about just leaving. This was about a scheme where prison, money, lives were at stake. Second, greed. I'd lived too many years counting every penny not to feel how the phrase sounds. Everything will be transferred to me, and you and I can leave. She didn't say it in a commanding tone, rather as proposing a scenario where both she and I come out winners. I understood there was a third person in this plot. That very husband, a man who doesn't even know yet that the two of us are mentally moving his piece around our board. I'm not making excuses. I just honestly admit, the thought that I could transform from a boy from a poor neighborhood into a man who leaves the country with a beautiful woman and her money turned out too loud to pretend I didn't hear it. That's exactly why, when this story went to where words like accident, guilt, and transfer property started appearing, I didn't leave. When words like accident, criminal case, and transfer everything to me appear in conversation, even the most romantic plot stops being just a love story. It transforms into a game where each piece matters not only for whom they love, but for who stands behind them with money and power. Alina described everything as if it were a logical sequence of steps. First, an accident where she's formally at fault. Then, a husband who stands between her and prison. Then, lawyers who advise transferring assets to her to save the business from freezing. In this scenario, I was assigned the role of someone who would help make the first link believable. I'm studying medicine. For many, this sounds noble. For me, for a long time, it was just another attempt to climb out of where I was born. In hospitals, I'd seen enough to understand. Between what's written in papers and what actually happens, there's often a wide gray zone. People don't die when it's convenient for documents. Protocols are filled out by those who are tired, who are in a hurry, who fear problems. And yes, sometimes by those who are paid to see the situation from a certain angle. Alina knew I had acquaintances in this system. She didn't ask directly, "Can you?" She said, "You know how all this gets processed." I understood the hint. We started discussing things people don't talk about in ordinary life. Time, lighting, who's on duty. What wording in a report would make the story an accident without extra questions? Each such conversation left a metallic taste in my mouth. On one hand, I saw a way out of poverty before me. Not hypothetical, but very concrete. A person who has everything is ready to transfer it to us if we see the plan through. On the other, everything I'd been taught in at least some ethics lectures screamed that we were going somewhere you don't return from unchanged. The scariest thing in all of this, honestly, wasn't even the plan itself, but the figure of the husband. I'd only seen him a couple times from a distance, at the gym, in a car, in random photos. Lean, confident, a man used to the world adjusting to his decisions. Someone who at 20 hauled boxes, and by 40 drives cars I'm used to looking at in dealership windows. He always figured in our conversations as the one who will cover everything. He won't let them imprison me, Alina said. He'll go instead. He always did that, took on everything that could hurt me. I believed her. There was no doubt in her voice. And maybe that's exactly why, on the day he came to the gym and signed up for a training session with me, everything inside me broke. He entered calmly, without scandal, without demonstrations, just a 40-year-old man who decided to get in shape. The manager called my name. Our eyes met. His didn't have hysteria. There was something much more alarming, calm interest. We conducted the first training session almost silently. I said practice phrases about technique, breathing, load. He did everything carefully, like someone used to following instructions and checking results. He didn't say a word about Alina, not a hint, not a casual question. This was unnatural. Any other husband would have already started from the doorway casually, asking who, what, how. He just watched. After the training, he left a tip that was almost half my daily shift for me. "Let's schedule another one," he said calmly. I went outside, sat on the curb behind the building, and realized my hands were shaking as if I'd just done not a warm-up, but surgery without anesthesia. The fear that had lived somewhere deep before rose to the surface. If he doesn't know anything, his behavior is strangely calm. If he knows, even stranger. At the next training session, he asked more, still within the framework of normal conversation. Where I'm from, where I study, how long I've been working. Is it hard for guys without money in this country now? Each such question was like a light press of a finger on a long aching spot. I answered with general phrases, didn't lie, but didn't say too much. Toward the end of the session, he suddenly remarked, "You probably know well how hospitals work. That's more important now than before. So much happens on the roads." The phrase was delivered as evenly as "do another set," but it made me go cold inside. I realized I was between two people, each of whom was used to thinking they controlled someone else's life. Alina, through love and contract. He, through money and power. And me, the one who learned too early the price of love, money, and power. That night, I thought for a long time about what I could do. Tell Alina her husband signed up with me, admit I'm afraid, pretend nothing's happening and continue playing by her plan, or go to him and lay everything out myself, hoping he'll protect me rather than crush me. None of the options looked safe. I chose the most questionable, drag out time and stay silent. That's exactly why there are still gaps in my version of events. I don't always remember what I said to whom first and what I only thought about. I remember only one thing very clearly. The moment when I realized that if this plan collapses because of me, Igor, a man who knows how to build and destroy systems, is unlikely to leave me in peace.
My name is Marina Sergeyevna. I'm 47, a clinical psychologist and forensic expert. My task here is not to justify or condemn, but to call things by their names. What specific psychological mechanisms and personality disorders made this story possible? Alina, 34 years old. Deficit trauma, narcissistic traits, and moral dissociation. If you separate emotions from structure, you can see in Alina a combination of narcissistic traits and emotional dependence on status. Narcissistic traits aren't necessarily full narcissistic personality disorder, but a stable pattern where a person measures their worth by external attributes and a sense of special entitlement to the better life. Alina grew up before Igor, with poverty, instability, a feeling that life wasn't determined by her. After Igor, she received a sharp rise in status, money, external shell. This is a classic example of compensating for shame and deficit through external grandiosity. Expensive house, expensive gym, perfect wife of a successful man. When Danya appears, he activates her other self, impulsive, living by the heart, which had been suppressed for many years by the role of display window. An internal conflict arises between the impulsive, emotional self and the narcissistic, status-oriented self accustomed to privileges. The key mechanism in Alina is moral dissociation. She separates her identity, I'm good, just cornered, from her actions. I'm consciously building a plan where my husband goes to prison and transfers everything to me. To withstand this inconsistency, the psyche launches several defenses. Rationalization. I'm not a murderer. I'm just looking for a way out of an unfair contract. Devaluation of the victim. Igor stops being perceived as a living person, transforms into a set of functions, shields, signs, transfers assets. Betrayal, blindness toward herself. She doesn't want to see her behavior as betrayal because it would destroy her image of victim of the golden cage. Essentially, Alina shows antisocial elements, readiness for criminal combination, against the background of vulnerable narcissism, fragile self-esteem, dependence on external beautiful life, conviction that she's owed a more just scenario, even at the cost of someone else's freedom. Causes: early experience of lack and shame, sharp social elevator that cemented the idea, without status, I don't exist. Years of living in the role of object of love and control, where honest departure equals total loss. Igor, 40 years old, hidden dependent position and controlling narcissism. From the outside, Igor is whipped. Everything for his wife, everything for her comfort. But psychologically, this isn't healthy care, but a dependent dynamic where his own worth is determined by the savior role. His harsh prenuptial contract isn't just business caution, but a form of controlling narcissism. I'll give you everything, but by my rules, and if you break the agreement, I have the right to zero out your life. This is a combination of codependency, readiness to shield, take blame, live by partner's interests, and hidden power, contract money, cameras, route control. He doesn't yell, doesn't make scenes, but tracks patterns, notices changes, businesslike records possible infidelity. At the same time, in his monologue, Igor presents himself as a victim of circumstances, which resembles a pattern of covert narcissism, externally modest, I'm just a loving husband, internally, a feeling that he did everything for her and has a moral right to total control and punishment for betrayal. His problem isn't only jealousy. He has fear of abandonment and humiliation. I was replaced by a young trainer. rigid notion of justice by his own rules. I built everything, so I dictate terms. Tendency toward passive-aggressive control instead of open conflict. Cameras, route checks, questions. Are you happy? Causes. Poor past where he proved his worth through achievements. Fusion of love and control. Doing everything for her equals keeping at any cost. Idea that trusting the world is dangerous and controlling is safe. Danya, 20 years old. Trauma of poverty, dependent, and dark traits. Danya is the youngest and most psychologically unformed. He doesn't have a delineated personality like Alina and Igor, but he has key risks. Trauma of chronic poverty and a sense of fundamental insecurity. Strong material deprivation, due to which money is perceived as the only real resource. His behavior shows a combination of dependent traits, tendency to rely on the strong, first on Alina and her money/status, then on Igor as a power figure, and elements of Machiavellianism from the dark triad, readiness to participate in a manipulative plan if the benefit seems sufficient. Important, Danya doesn't look like a cold psychopath. He has fear, doubts, guilt, but greed and fear of poverty constantly override moral breaks. He perfectly understands he's doing something dangerous, but underestimates how dangerous the people he's playing with are. Psychologically, he's in the position of Karpman's drama triangle. Now victim, poverty, pressure, now rescuer, helping Alina get out, now potential persecutor, participation in criminal plan. But unlike the classic scenario, there are two more powerful figures standing above him, each with their own disorders. Causes. Prolonged experience of powerlessness and financial shame. Absence of stable moral boundaries with a strong desire to break out. Romanticization of the idea, change fate with one leap, even at the cost of participating in a crime. All three demonstrate cross-betrayal and betrayal trauma. Each violates the basic trust of another for their own needs, while to the very end seeing themselves not as aggressor but as victim of circumstances. How exactly their distorted ideas about love, power, and justice formed into a concrete plan, step by step, and with indication of inconsistencies in their versions, can only be analyzed in the final part. Now we have 3 confessions, and each is subjective. None of them is lying 100%, and none is telling the whole truth. The psychological work here is not only to name diagnoses, but to show where exactly they edited reality to suit themselves. 1. Who authored the plan? Alina claims the plan was born from her fear of the contract. I didn't want his death. I wanted to use his willingness to sacrifice himself and bypass the infidelity clause. In her version of initiative, she is the victim of a golden cage and harsh agreement. Danya is the helper executor. Igor is the potential victim, turned into a figure in the scheme. However, her speech contains stable distortions. She minimizes her activity. We were just fantasizing. It's logic, not crime. She blurs the moment of decision. There's no point where she honestly says, I agreed to the plan. Instead, the boundary erased itself. Typical defense for morally unacceptable decisions. In reality, the initiator of specifically the financial expansion of the plan, not just imprison, but also withdraw assets, is Alina. The idea that Igor, fearing freezing, will transfer everything to her as a trusted person sounds only in her monologue and then echoes in Danya's words. Igor and Danya don't formulate this part explicitly, only react to consequences. Conclusion. The original idea he'll take the blame himself is born from the dynamics of their marriage. The idea he'll transfer everything to me and I'll leave is a product of Alina's narcissistic rationalization. 2. What is Igor hiding? In the open text, he makes himself out to be a loving fool. Says he didn't build plans, emphasizes he didn't go head-on, denies active actions except observation. But his monologue reveals several important inconsistencies. He knows Alina's routes, times, and frequency of trips too precisely. Notices when she opens the safe at night and takes out the contract. Goes to the gym, sees the list of trainers, records Danya's surname, but claims he did nothing then. Psychologically, this looks like retrospective self-justification. He wants to preserve the image I didn't manipulate, though his behavioral style, gathering facts, waiting, letting the other feel safe, is typical for a controlling personality preparing the ground without showing teeth. Most likely Igor, long before official exposure, already suspected not only infidelity, but that they're trying to bypass him legally. Alina's questions about cameras, highway, protocols, doesn't randomly come to Danya as a trainer. This is a way to extract information without revealing cards. He omits whether he spoke to Danya directly about knowing or suspecting, whether he set conditions, I won't touch you if you, whether he discussed with lawyers the option of transferring assets temporarily. These gaps in his version are conscious. This is how covert control works. Actions exist, but consciousness edits the story to preserve the image of victim, not player. 3. What truth is Danya hiding? Danya is maximally emotional and seems most honest, but he too has key gaps. He admits he didn't leave even when accident, criminal case, transfer property appeared. Talks about meeting Igor and his calmness, but doesn't discuss how their contacts ended. Were there money, promises, threats? His fear, if the plan collapses because of me, Igor will destroy me, may be not only fantasy, but a reaction to direct or indirect power signals, the size of tips, questions about hospitals, demonstration that the husband understands who he is and where he's from. He clearly doesn't fully disclose what exactly he told Igor about Alina's plans, doesn't specify when he first almost let it slip and to whom, blurs the moment when he stopped being only on Alina's side and started balancing between two. Psychologically, this resembles defensive amnesia and softening of his own guilt. The more he feels like a victim of two strong ones, the easier for him not to notice where he himself became co-author of their betrayal. 4. General inconsistencies and true dynamics. If you overlay their versions on each other, nodes emerge. Alina says the plan was hers and Danya's, and Igor is only the supposed victim. Igor claims he made no moves but ends up in contact with the trainer, points to hospitals, roads, and cameras. Danya describes himself as cornered but agrees to be the connecting link between accident and hospital part, knowing that a third party's freedom is at stake. Underneath lies a common formula. Alina uses love and trust as a resource for the scheme. Igor uses money, contract, and hidden control as a resource to preserve power, even if he considers himself just defending. Danya uses both as possible elevators from poverty, simultaneously fearing both one and the other. All three practice moral selectivity. I'm just protecting myself, Igor. I'm just escaping a trap, Alina. I just want to get out of poverty, Danya. In all three cases, the end justifies the means, and responsibility is shifted to circumstances. That's exactly why psychologically they don't see themselves as criminals. Each feels like a victim, even when objectively crossing boundaries. This is the essence of the psychological detective in this story. The crime begins long before the accident, in moments when love, fear, and money slowly replace concepts of good and evil.